Some frozen vegetable brands sold in the UK are putting consumers at risk, not because vegetables are bad, but because certain brands contaminate them. These are the same products people buy for quick, healthy family meals, yet recalls, safety alerts and complaints show serious problems behind the scenes. Freezing can lock in nutrients, but it can also lock in bacteria and contamination. I reviewed recall notices, food safety warnings, and repeated consumer reports. What I found shows clear patterns of poor processing and brand-level failures. Today, I'm exposing 8 UK frozen vegetable brands you must avoid, 3 that are safe to eat, and how to spot bad brands yourself. Let's get started. Number 8. Avoid Farmfoods frozen vegetables. Farmfoods is built on one promise: cheap frozen food. For many households, it feels practical and familiar. Bulk bags, low prices, quick meals. Their own brand frozen vegetables look simple and harmless. Peas, sweet corn, mixed veg. No bold health claims, no flashy packaging, just value pricing. And that simplicity is exactly why people trust it. The problem isn't that Farmfoods sells frozen vegetables. It's what repeatedly shows up once you look at customer feedback and handling patterns. Across reviews and complaints, the same issues appear again and again. Excessive ice buildup inside the bag, freezer burn, vegetables turning mushy after cooking, and inconsistent quality between packs. Those aren't just taste issues. Heavy ice crystals and freezer burn often point to temperature fluctuations during storage or transport. That suggests products may have partially thawed and refrozen at some point, something frozen food safety experts consider a warning sign. While freezing slows bacterial growth, it doesn't undo damage caused earlier in the supply chain. Another recurring concern is traceability. Many own-brand frozen vegetable packs from this retailer provide minimal sourcing information, often using vague wording like "packed for," without clearly stating where the vegetables were grown, processed, or frozen. When transparency is low, accountability becomes harder, and consumers are left guessing if something goes wrong. For shoppers buying in bulk, especially families trying to stretch a food budget, this matters. Poor handling doesn't just affect texture, it affects nutritional quality and confidence in how the product was managed from field to freezer. Low prices alone don't make a product unsafe, but consistent patterns of quality complaints and storage red flags mean these frozen vegetables deserve caution. If concerns about storage and handling already feel uncomfortable, the next brand reveals problems that go beyond quality into issues serious enough to trigger official warnings. Number 7. Avoid Iceland frozen vegetables. Iceland has built its reputation almost entirely around frozen food. For many shoppers, that creates a sense of confidence. If a retailer specializes in frozen products, surely they know how to handle them properly. Their own brand frozen vegetables are marketed as convenient, family-friendly staples, often positioned as better quality alternatives to generic budget ranges. But when you look past the branding, cracks start to appear. Over the years, Iceland has been linked to multiple quality complaints involving frozen vegetable products, reports of unexpected foreign material, off smells once cooked, and inconsistent texture from bag to bag. Individually, these issues might sound minor. Taken together, they point to weaknesses in quality control at scale. One of the biggest problems with frozen vegetables sold in high volumes is supplier pressure. To keep prices competitive, retailers often rely on large, fast-moving supply chains that source vegetables from multiple countries, sometimes switching suppliers with little notice. That increases the risk of inconsistent processing standards, especially when washing, blanching, and freezing steps aren't tightly controlled. There's also the issue of recalls and safety alerts. Iceland, like other major UK retailers, has had frozen vegetable lines of wider supplier-level recalls in the past, particularly during large contamination incidents that impacted multiple supermarkets at once. In these cases, products were pulled not because something was definitely found in every bag, but because the risk couldn't be ruled out. For consumers, that distinction often gets lost. The product looks the same, the packaging stays familiar, And unless you actively check recall notices, you may never know a product you bought was flagged after the fact. When a brand becomes synonymous with frozen food, shoppers naturally assume a higher level of expertise. But volume, speed, and cost-cutting can quietly undermine that trust. With Iceland's own brand frozen vegetables, the recurring mix of quality complaints, supplier complexity, and recall exposure means buyers should be far more cautious than the branding suggests. And what's coming next isn't about volume or price pressure, it's about products that were officially pulled from shelves after something was found that simply shouldn't have been there. Number 6. Avoid Morrisons savers and budget frozen vegetables. Morrisons has long marketed itself as a supermarket that's closer to food production than its competitors. In-store butchers, bakers, and a heavy emphasis on freshness create an image of control and care. That reputation often spills over into its frozen ranges, where shoppers assume the same standards apply. But Morrisons' lower-tier frozen vegetable lines tell a different story. Budget and savers ranges are designed to compete on price, and that shift changes everything behind the scenes. When margins are squeezed, sourcing often becomes broader, suppliers rotate more frequently, and quality checks are pushed to the minimum required level. Over time, these products have appeared in recall notices and consumer complaint threads involving packaging failures, inconsistent freezing, and unexpected debris. While not every issue rises to the level of a national headline, the pattern matters. Frozen vegetables rely heavily on proper blanching, rapid freezing, and airtight packaging. When any one of those steps is compromised, quality and safety degrade quickly. Another issue is mixed origin sourcing. Some Morrisons frozen vegetable packs list multiple countries of origin without clarifying which batch came from where. That may meet legal requirements, but it makes traceability harder if a problem is discovered later. When a supplier issue occurs upstream, customers often only find out if they happen to check recall lists at the right time. There's also a perception gap. Shoppers trust the Morrisons name and assume consistency across the store. But budget frozen lines are not held to the same standards as premium or own prepared products. They're processed in different facilities, often by third-party manufacturers, and handled in bulk. For families relying on frozen vegetables as everyday staples, that distinction matters. It's not about one-off mistakes. It's about repeated signals that quality and transparency are not priorities at the lower end of the range. And the next brand moves away from budget excuses entirely, exposing problems that surfaced even in lines marketed as dependable household essentials. Number 5. Avoid Sainsbury's frozen vegetables. Sainsbury's is widely seen as a safe supermarket. It doesn't feel cheap, it doesn't feel risky, and many shoppers assume its frozen vegetables sit somewhere between budget and premium. That reputation creates trust, especially among families who believe they're making a responsible choice. But when you look at frozen vegetable products sold under the Sainsbury's name, a different picture starts to form. Over the years, Sainsbury's frozen veg has been caught up in supplier-level recalls and safety alerts, including large incidents that affected multiple UK supermarkets at once. These weren't cosmetic issues. They involved contamination risks serious enough to justify pulling products from shelves. One of the biggest problems is distance. Many frozen vegetables sold under major supermarket brands are grown abroad, processed in large industrial facilities, and then shipped long distances before freezing is complete. Each extra step increases the chance that something goes wrong before the vegetables ever reach a UK freezer. Another concern is how quietly problems are communicated. When recalls happen, they're often published online or posted briefly in-store, long after customers have already cooked and eaten the product. Unless you actively check food safety alerts, you may never realise something you trusted was flagged as a risk. There's also the issue of branding. When a supermarket name is stamped on a product, shoppers assume tighter oversight. In reality, many frozen vegetables are produced by third-party suppliers handling enormous volumes for multiple retailers at once. If a failure happens at that level, it doesn't stop at one brand, but consumers still associate the risk with the name they trusted. Sainsbury's frozen vegetables aren't automatically dangerous, but repeated involvement in supplier recalls and the illusion of control created by branding means shoppers often feel more secure than the facts justify. And the next brand is even more familiar, one almost every UK household has in their freezer at some point, often without a second thought. Number 4. Avoid Asda frozen vegetables. Asda frozen vegetables are everywhere. They're cheap, widely available, and often marketed as everyday essentials for families trying to eat better on a budget. For many shoppers, Asda feels familiar and reliable, a place where you assume the basics are handled properly. But Asda's frozen vegetable products have repeatedly been affected by supplier-level recalls and safety alerts over the years. In some cases, these recalls were issued due to contamination risks. In others, they involved foreign material being discovered where it simply shouldn't have been. These aren't theoretical risks. They're documented incidents that triggered products being pulled from sale. A major issue here is scale. Asda sells frozen vegetables in massive volumes, often sourced from large international suppliers producing for multiple supermarkets at once. When something goes wrong in that kind of system, the impact spreads quickly. One processing failure can affect thousands of bags across the country before anyone notices. There's also the problem of perception. Because Asda positions many of its frozen vegetables as basic, no-frills food, shoppers tend not to question them. They're added straight into meals, blended into sauces, or served to children without a second thought. That level of routine trust is exactly what makes quality failures more concerning. Like many supermarkets, Asda relies heavily on third-party manufacturers. That means the brand name on the front of the bag doesn't necessarily reflect who actually washed, blanched, and froze the vegetables. When oversight slips at that stage, consumers are left exposed and often uninformed. Asda frozen vegetables aren't unsafe by default, but their repeated appearance in recall lists combined with high-volume sourcing and quiet communication when issues arise makes them a brand shoppers should approach with caution. And coming up next is a retailer millions of people associate with value and efficiency, but behind the low prices are risks most customers never expect. Number 3. Avoid Tesco frozen vegetables. Tesco is the biggest supermarket name in the UK, and that alone creates a huge amount of trust. For many shoppers, Tesco frozen vegetables feel like the default option, familiar, widely available, and assumed to be safe simply because of the brand's size and reputation. But Tesco's frozen vegetable products have appeared multiple times in official recall notices over the years. These recalls were not issued lightly. They involved risks such as contamination and foreign objects, serious enough for food safety authorities to warn consumers not to eat the affected products. One of the key issues is scale. Tesco sources frozen vegetables in enormous quantities, often from large international suppliers producing for several retailers at once. When a failure happens at supplier level, whether during washing, blanching, or freezing, Tesco's reach means a problem can spread nationwide before it's detected. Another concern is how recalls are communicated. Like most supermarkets, Tesco typically posts notices online or in-store after products have already been sold. If you don't actively follow food safety alerts, you could easily miss the warning altogether. The packaging doesn't change, the freezer aisle looks the same, and the risk stays invisible. There's also a misconception that a well-known supermarket brand equals tighter control. In reality, many frozen vegetables sold under the Tesco name are processed by third-party manufacturers. Tesco sets standards, but day-to-day handling happens elsewhere, and when those standards fail, the consumer pays the price. Tesco frozen vegetables aren't automatically dangerous, but their repeated involvement in recalls, combined with the sheer volume they sell, means the consequences of any mistake are far greater than most shoppers realise. And the next brand is even more surprising, trusted for its low prices, praised for efficiency, yet tied to incidents that shocked customers when they came to light. Number 2. Avoid Aldi frozen vegetables. Aldi has built massive trust in the UK by doing one thing extremely well: selling everyday food for less. For many shoppers, Aldi frozen vegetables feel like a smart choice. Simple, affordable, and often praised online for being just as good as bigger supermarket brands. That confidence is exactly why issues linked to Aldi frozen vegetables have caused such strong reactions when they surfaced. Over the years, Aldi has been involved in high-profile frozen food recalls, including incidents where frozen vegetable products were pulled due to contamination risks and foreign material findings. These weren't minor quality complaints. They were serious enough to prompt official warnings and immediate withdrawals. A major factor here is Aldi's reliance on large European suppliers producing frozen vegetables at enormous scale. These facilities often supply multiple retailers across different countries at the same time. When a failure occurs, whether in washing, blanching, or hygiene controls, the same problem can end up in thousands of bags across multiple markets. Another issue is consumer behavior. Aldi shoppers often trust frozen vegetables enough to use them quickly and casually, adding them straight into meals, smoothies, or quick dishes without much thought. Food safety agencies have repeatedly warned that frozen vegetables should be thoroughly cooked, yet that message is rarely reinforced on the front of packaging. Communication is also a concern. While Aldi does publish recall notices, they're easy to miss unless you actively search for them. Many customers only discover there was an issue after the fact when news reports or social media bring it to light. Aldi frozen vegetables are not inherently unsafe. But the combination of massive volume, shared suppliers, and past recall involvement means shoppers shouldn't assume low price equals low risk. And the final brand on this list is the most trusted of all, a name many people believe represents the gold standard of frozen vegetables. Number 1. Avoid Bird's Eye frozen vegetables. Bird's Eye is the name most people trust the most when it comes to frozen vegetables. For decades, it's been marketed as the gold standard, farm-focused, family-safe, and expertly frozen to lock-in goodness. For many households, Bird's Eye feels like the safest possible choice in the freezer aisle. That's exactly why its history is so concerning. Bird's Eye frozen vegetables have been directly impacted by some of the most serious supplier-level contamination incidents ever to hit the UK frozen food supply. In the widely reported 2018 frozen vegetable recall crisis, products linked to Bird's Eye's supply chain were pulled over fears of Listeria monocytogenes, a bacterium that can be especially dangerous for pregnant women, the elderly, and people with weakened immune systems. What made that situation alarming wasn't just the bacteria itself, but how widespread the exposure was. The vegetables looked normal. They were already in people's freezers. Many had been eaten before warnings ever reached the public. And because Bird's Eye is seen as a premium, trustworthy brand, consumers were far less likely to question the product or double-check safety guidance. Another uncomfortable truth is that Bird's Eye doesn't grow or process all of its vegetables itself. Like many major brands, it relies on large third-party suppliers operating at industrial scale. When something goes wrong at that level, hygiene failures, contaminated water, improper blanching, the Bird's Eye logo on the bag doesn't protect the consumer. There's also the issue of messaging. Frozen vegetables are often marketed as ready to use, effortless, and healthy. But food safety authorities have repeatedly warned that frozen vegetables should be thoroughly cooked before consumption. Advice many people don't associate with a brand they trust this deeply. At this point in the video, if you're finding this eye-opening, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps more people see this information, and it ensures you don't miss the safer alternatives and warning signs coming up next. Bird's Eye frozen vegetables aren't guaranteed to harm you, but when the most trusted brand on the shelf has been tied to some of the most serious contamination scares in recent history, blind trust becomes the real risk. And now that you've seen all 8 brands to avoid, it's time to talk about what you should be buying instead and how to protect yourself before these products ever reach your freezer. Recommended brand 3, Green Giant. Green Giant stands out for one simple reason: consistency. While many frozen vegetable brands rely heavily on rotating suppliers and cost-cutting shortcuts, Green Giant has built its reputation around controlled sourcing and predictable processing standards. That doesn't make it perfect, but it does make it noticeably more reliable than many supermarket own brand options. One of the biggest advantages Green Giant has is clarity. Their frozen vegetable packaging tends to provide clearer information about what you're buying, without relying too heavily on vague phrases or marketing fluff. You're less likely to see confusing origin statements or overly broad sourcing claims, which matters when traceability becomes important. From a processing standpoint, Green Giant generally follows a tighter harvest-to-freeze timeline. Vegetables are blanched and frozen quickly after harvesting, which helps preserve texture and nutritional value while reducing the window where contamination or degradation can occur. That speed is critical. Many problems in frozen vegetables happen before freezing ever begins. Another key difference is recall history. Compared to large UK supermarket frozen veg lines, Green Giant has been far less frequently involved in high-profile UK recall incidents. When issues do arise in the wider frozen food sector, they tend to be linked to massive shared suppliers producing for multiple retailers, something Green Giant appears to manage more carefully. That doesn't mean you can ignore basic food safety rules. Frozen vegetables should still be fully cooked, stored properly, and handled carefully once opened. But choosing a brand with fewer red flags gives you a stronger starting point. Green Giant isn't just about branding. It reflects a supply chain that's more controlled, more transparent, and less prone to the quiet failures that plague cheaper, high-volume frozen veg lines. And next, we're moving up the list to a brand many people already associate with higher standards. But the reasons why it performs better might surprise you. Recommended brand 2, Waitrose Frozen Vegetables. Waitrose has long positioned itself as a supermarket that prioritizes quality over volume, and that approach carries through to its frozen vegetable range. For shoppers, the difference often isn't obvious at first glance. Frozen peas still look like frozen peas, but the standards behind them are noticeably tighter. One of the biggest reasons Waitrose performs better is supplier control. Compared to mass-market supermarkets, Waitrose works with a narrower pool of suppliers and places stronger requirements on traceability and handling. That means fewer last-minute supplier switches and more consistent processing methods across batches. There's also greater transparency in how information is communicated. When issues do arise, Waitrose has a stronger track record of clear, visible recall communication, both online and in-store. That may not sound exciting, but it's critical. A brand that communicates quickly and openly reduces the risk of customers unknowingly consuming a flagged product. Processing standards matter too. Waitrose frozen vegetables are generally blanched and frozen under stricter timelines, helping preserve quality while limiting the window for contamination before freezing. Texture complaints, excessive ice buildup, and freezer burn appear far less frequently in consumer feedback compared to budget-heavy competitors. Another subtle but important factor is volume. Waitrose sells fewer units than discount or mass-market chains. That smaller scale reduces stress on the supply chain and makes it easier to monitor hygiene, cold storage, and transport conditions consistently. No frozen vegetable brand is completely risk-free, but when you compare patterns, recalls, complaints, transparency, and supplier oversight, Waitrose frozen vegetables tend to sit on the safer end of the spectrum. And the final recommended brand takes this one step further, because frozen food isn't just part of its business, it is the business. Recommended brand 1, Picard. Picard sits at the top of this list for one reason: frozen food is their entire identity. Unlike supermarkets where frozen vegetables are just one small aisle among thousands of products, Picard's business depends entirely on getting freezing, storage, and sourcing right. That focus changes everything. One of Picard's biggest strengths is speed and control. Their vegetables are typically frozen very soon after harvesting, using rapid freeze methods that minimize time spent in transit or storage before freezing. That short window matters. Many of the problems seen in frozen vegetables, contamination, degradation, loss of texture, happen before freezing ever begins. Picard also places a heavy emphasis on supplier audits and traceability. Packaging tends to clearly state origins and processing details rather than hiding behind vague language. If there's an issue upstream, identifying affected batches becomes faster and more precise, which reduces consumer exposure. Another key difference is cold chain discipline. Because Picard specializes exclusively in frozen food, temperature control is not optional or secondary. Storage, transport, and in-store handling are all designed around maintaining consistent freezing conditions, which dramatically reduces risks like partial thawing and refreezing. Recall history matters too. Compared with mass-market UK supermarket frozen veg lines, Picard has been far less visible in high-profile contamination incidents. That doesn't mean problems can never occur, but the patterns suggest tighter systems and faster responses when something does go wrong. For consumers, Picard represents what frozen vegetables should be when done properly: controlled sourcing, fast freezing, clear information, and fewer unpleasant surprises. Now that you've seen which brands raise red flags and which ones consistently perform better, the most important skill is knowing how to protect yourself no matter where you shop. Next, I'll break down exactly how to spot bad frozen vegetable brands before you buy them, using simple warning signs anyone can check in seconds. How to spot bad frozen vegetable brands before you buy. At this point, the most important takeaway isn't memorizing brand names, it's learning how to protect yourself anywhere you shop. Bad frozen vegetable brands tend to follow the same patterns, and once you know what to look for, they become much easier to spot. Start with origin and traceability. If a bag uses vague phrases like "packed in the UK" without clearly stating where the vegetables were grown and processed, that's a warning sign. Packing location is not the same as growing or processing location, and unclear sourcing makes it harder to track problems when something goes wrong. Next, look closely at price versus claims. If a product is extremely cheap but marketed as a premium, farm fresh, or high quality, something doesn't add up. Frozen vegetables still cost money to grow, wash, blanch, freeze, and transport properly. Unrealistically low prices often mean corners were cut somewhere along the chain. Pay attention to the physical condition of the product. Excessive ice crystals inside the bag, large frozen clumps, or visible freezer burn are red flags. These signs often indicate temperature fluctuations, meaning the product may have partially thawed and refrozen during storage or transport. Check the label instructions carefully. Food safety authorities have warned that frozen vegetables should be thoroughly cooked, yet some packaging makes them feel ready to use or effortless. If cooking instructions are unclear, minimal, or downplayed, that's a concern. Another overlooked factor is recall transparency. Brands that take safety seriously communicate recalls clearly and visibly. If you only ever hear about recalls through news articles or social media, not from the brand itself, that suggests weak accountability. Finally, trust patterns, not excuses. One bad batch can happen to any company. Repeated complaints about texture, smell, foreign material, or quality across time point to systemic issues, not bad luck. Frozen vegetables can absolutely be safe, nutritious, and convenient, but safety depends on how a brand handles sourcing, processing, freezing, and honesty. When you know what warning signs to look for, you stop shopping on blind trust and start shopping with control. If this breakdown helped you think differently about what's in your freezer, let people know in the comments, share this with someone who shops for your household, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future investigations. Would you like to revise anything in this final section or adjust the tone before we wrap?